From Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio, this is the All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and I'm the Senior Director of Admissions and Financial Aid at the medical school here at Case. This is another one of those special episodes where we're deviating from talking with medical school admissions people, but this time we're talking to two directors of Post-Bac programs. I know that the concept of Post-Bac programs can confuse people sometimes. Questions like, who are they for, and why would somebody need one come up? What are the different types of Post-Bac programs is another common question. Well, in this episode, we're going to answer all of those questions. Before we get to that, though, at the time that I'm recording this in mid-March of 2020, we're all experiencing some unprecedented changes in many parts of our daily lives due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It should be of no surprise to you that the AAMC's recruitment fair in Chicago, which is supposed to take place in a couple weeks, has been canceled. That said, they are working on setting up another one of their virtual fairs for Friday, March 27th. The AAMC had their big virtual fair a few weeks ago, and nearly 10,000 people visited it. These virtual fairs really are an easy way to quickly get some info about medical schools, and more importantly, to chat with admissions people from those med schools. So I highly recommend them. Our team at Case, we plan on participating in the March 27th virtual fair, and I'm sure a bunch of others will again too. So if you find that you have a little extra time on your hands right now, a little more than usual, then maybe this is something to circle and put on your calendar for March 27th. At this time, I don't have any registration details to link to, but keep your eyes on the AAMC's Twitter feed. They're pretty good about tweeting stuff out pretty often. And I'll certainly pass along anything that I hear to you. Speaking of extra time on your hands, this could also be a good time to catch up on some of your favorite podcasts. So if you've missed some of the previous episodes of All Access, well then, hey, maybe go back and have a listen. Again, hey, we're all in uncharted territory right now, and science and medical experts have really been brought to the forefront to help lead us through these days. So let's all make sure that we're being socially responsible and setting a good example for others. So make smart choices for you and your community. Be safe, be well, and let's flatten the curve together. So we got this. All right, let me tell you about my two guests today. Elizabeth Fote represents the Washington University in St. Louis Post-Bac program and has worked in higher education for more than 20 years with a focus on academic advising and student services. She has served as director of the Post-Baccalaureate program at WashU for the past 12 years. She currently advises a very diverse population of students. Many of them are working adults, by the way. Elizabeth is a longtime member of the National Academic Advising Association and is active in the National Association of Advisors for Health Professions, the NAHP. You've heard us mention that many times before. She's participated in the National Academic Advising Association at the national level and has been invited as a speaker at the UC Davis Pre-Med and Pre-Health Professions National Conference, which is a big one out there. She earned her bachelor's degree in letters from the University of Oklahoma and a master's degree in Near Eastern Studies from the University of Michigan, which shows that the liberal arts can take you anywhere. Then we have Dr. Glenn Cummings. He is the Associate Dean and Director of Health Profession Advising Office and the Post-Baccalaureate Pre-Medical Program at Bryn Mawr College, which is just outside of Philadelphia. Having spent the past 20 years advising various populations of pre-health students, Dr. Cummings' current professional focus is on providing individualized support to an annual cohort of pre-medical post-bacs. After finishing his doctorate at the University of Virginia, Dr. Cummings shifted his professional focus from research to academic advising, becoming UVA's Director of Pre-Professional Advising in 2000. In 2004, he moved to Princeton, where he directed the Health Professions Office, Advising Office office there and chaired the Committee on the Health Professions and expanded the pre-health advising program across the campus. He arrived at Bryn Mawr in 2014. Dr. Cummings is also an active member on the National Association of Advisors in Health Professions, that NAHP, serving as the assistant director on its communications committee. With a particular interest in writing, he has also chaired the NAHP's Letters of Evaluation Task Force and served as a member of the Association of American Medical Colleges, the AAMC, Letters of Evaluation Advisory Group. Overall, he considers it a privilege to be able to support students by helping them develop strategies for academic excellence, tapping into their motivation for medicine, and coaching them through a successful process of applying to medical school. These two are absolute experts, fonts of great knowledge. So let's get after it with them. Are you ready? Here we go. Well, today I'm happy to be joined by two friends that are experts in the area of, well, I mean, many things, but in particular, both post-bac programs. Elizabeth Fote is from the Post-Bac program at WashU University in St. Louis. Good morning, Elizabeth. Great to have you here.
Good morning. Thanks so much.
Yeah. The other voice you're going to be hearing today is that of Glenn Cummings from the Post-Bac program at Bryn Mawr College, which is just outside of Philadelphia. Hey, Glenn.
Good morning. Glad
Welcome.
to be here.
You guys both know that I am thrilled to have you with this important conversation today about your area of the pre-med journey for some prospective applicants. What's also great is not only do you run your programs and advise your current post-bac students to help them get into med school, but also you do play a role in admissions as well, like in admitting students to your program. So I definitely want to get to that part of your role today too, for sure. Here's how I think we'll structure the kind of the general outline of our conversation today, just so our listeners kind of know where we're going to be going. I think we'll start off with kind of a broad overview of what exactly post-bac programs are and how they can be different from master's programs and what some people might call enhancer programs or special masters. We'll talk about who post-bac programs are intended for. I think that's important. Then we'll get into how post-bac programs work and the coursework and the intricacies and what they can offer. And we'll talk about how post-bacs are viewed by med school admissions people like me. And then maybe we'll kind of wrap up kind of near the end, talk about the admissions piece of what you do in getting into the post-bac programs and what that application process is like. That sound okay?
Sounds great.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sure we'll go off on some tangents and we have a lot of wiggle room, but I just wanted listeners to kind of know where we're going to be going. But first, I think it's important to say post-bac stands for post-baccalaureate. It's after a bachelor's degree. It's in the educational sequence. Think of it as kind of wedged in between a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. Have either of you heard of other pronunciations of post-baccalaureate?
Post-bachelorette, yes.
I think we both heard that, and people don't even know they're saying it.
Okay, but, so it's post-baccalaureate, to be clear, not post-bachelorette. That corrects
me.
Correct.
And I also learned the abbreviation for post-bac. Glenn schooled me. It's spelled with one C, not two. So I've also learned something already today. So in any of the show notes, if you see, I'll write post-bac, it's with one C. That's the correct pronunciation. Right, Glenn?
That's what the centralized application service decided. I mean, that's the way they decided to spell it. So, yeah.
Well, hey, before we get into all that stuff, Glenn, why don't you start off by telling us something people maybe don't know about you? I'd already read your bio sketch. People know your background, but what some people don't know about you? And then why don't you tell us a little bit about the Bryn Mawr program?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Christian, for including me.
Absolutely.
I have a PhD in early American literature. So if you're wondering what PhDs in English do, they become directors of post-bac programs. It's a long story.
Makes perfect sense.
But I'm not sure everyone knows that what my degree and my academic background is in. Other things people don't know about me. I was a figure skating judge. I'm a competitive figure skater, or I was. I'm not anymore. I'm too old for it now. But Yeah. So it's a whole nother life,
Wow.
but I grew up doing that, trained at the national level, and then went on and became a judge, a coach, and then a judge, and had this whole other life before I started my college education. So I still get out on the ice sometimes and skate and go to competitions occasionally and see my old friends. So it's something I do for fun.
Wow. That is interesting.
Yeah.
So you lived in rinks a lot growing up then?
I did. I
Hours
grew up in Wisconsin and Colorado, and places with winter sports.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your program.
Well, the program is a 1-year career changer program. And then we can get into the details of those things later. Mm-hmm. But my program is designed for students that have finished college and have, by and large, not done any or at least many of the pre-medical requirements, earlier. So they come to Bryn Mawr, they take the core pre-medical curriculum in 1 year. We start usually in late May around Memorial Day, and we go till the following May. So it's exactly 12 months. They take chemistry over the summer, and then they take the rest of their courses during the regular academic year. We're a full-time program, so it's a pretty intensive program. That's all you're doing when you're in the program. And we've been around since 1972. So from what I can tell, we're coming up on our 50th anniversary. I always ask candidates when they come to interview if they have any ideas of how to celebrate a 50th anniversary, because I don't know what to do. I don't know if I'm supposed to be doing fireworks or a hot air balloon or I don't know. But we've got to do something to mark the fact that we've been around for 50 years. And I think we're one of the first of these types of programs. It's a little, I know Columbia's been around a long time, and there have been some others that have existed for a while, but we have 18 linkages, which we can talk about later, but 1 dental school and 17 medical schools, 1 osteopathic and 16 allopathic medical schools. And the only thing I think you probably should know just generally about the program is we have 2 full-time advisors, myself being one of them, that are working with this cohort of about 75 students. So they get a lot of attention when they're in our program.
Sounds like it. That's awesome. Elizabeth, hello. Why don't you? What's something people don't generally know about you when you're first meeting them?
Well, I'm a transplant to Missouri. I have only lived here about 15 years. And this is a really beautiful state. It's, I can definitely say it's underrated. There are so many things to do, great restaurants, great cultural opportunities. And I really love to be outside. So, we've got amazing, state parks, and just there's so much beauty here. That's something that I really appreciate and, love to take advantage of.
Oh, that's great. Cool. Where were you prior to that? If you went from...
So I came here from New Orleans. I started my academic advising career at Tulane University. So I've been doing advising and student support and mentoring for about 20 years now.
Wow. Cool. Well, tell us a little bit about the WashU program.
Sure. So we have been around since 2001. Basically, the origin was, we saw adult students taking these science courses to prepare for med school. Our home, we started out in University College, which is an evening, adult part-time division primarily. And one of our deans noticed this kind of pattern of people trying to, prepare for med school on their own, and said, let's give this support and structure and help these folks out. So we've grown a lot since then. At this point, we have a much more structured program. We still are flexible, so we can support students who are doing a career change if they need all those prereqs. We also support students who are needing enhancement work and building their GPA. And then we have a third category we think of as a blended program where students can come in, and if they are coming from engineering and they've got great, math and physics background, but they need a lot more biology and chemistry, they can come and do, just what they need. So really our approach is to talk with each student, they'll be assigned an advisor when they get admitted, and we'll have a conversation about, what their background is coming in, what content they need, what gaps they need to fill, and kind of map out a program. So I would say that's really our hallmark is our flexibility. We can support students who are coming from a variety of backgrounds, and most of our students are pre-med, but we certainly do have pre-dental, pre-PA, PT, occasionally pharmacy, dentistry. So, we've got the coursework, and occasionally a student will shift goals while they're in the program, and that's fine too. So our students can take day or evening courses. Most of them are taking evening courses, which are smaller and have a lower tuition point. There's a pretty good community feel, I would say, in the program. Students tend to, help and support each other, pass on information about, job openings in a lab or a doctor's office, things like that. Most of our students are going through and taking 2 lab science courses at a time, or 3 or 4 lecture courses at a time if they're doing enhancement. And they typically are working part-time because we want them to be getting clinical experience along the way and volunteering and kind of building their overall portfolio for applying to med school.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I think people can already hear some of the differences in the programs. And yours is a little newer, Glenn's is a little older, but that Glenn's is 1 year, yours is more than 1 year sometimes. So I like that we already have this diversity in programming. Glenn, why don't we start off by can you start explaining what post-bac programs are? And then we'll have Elizabeth kind of talk about how they're different from master's programs and special masters and things like that.
Sure. The term post-bac is used pretty loosely, so it's, the definition's a little slippery, I think. But I know that the AAMC and the material they have on their website and some other material out there that tries to define post-bac says that it's a pre-medical post-bac program is a program, where you're taking these courses post-bachelor's degree. They tend to fall into a few different types. The career changer one, like we have at Bryn Mawr, is one type. Like I said, for someone who I used to call them start from scratch programs because they're really, intended for people that are starting from scratch with the requirements. And then there's certainly an enhancement, record enhancer, or sometimes called just academic enhancement type program, where someone has taken a lot, or sometimes all plus more of the pre-medical requirements. They might have been science majors in college and taken a lot of time, but they're not necessarily a competitive applicant for admission to one of these health professional schools because maybe their grades just weren't so great. And so they go to a post-bac program and take additional science, hopefully do better and gain admission that way. And then the third type that tends to be out there in some locations are the type for underrepresented students that have a more diversity initiative, trying to build a pipeline into medical school to make medical school more diverse than it is. And they, I think they're of the first 2 types, I think under the underrepresented umbrella, they're both of those types but they're specifically for students traditionally underrepresented in medicine. So, those are the 3 types. Some are 1 year, some are more fluid in terms of time. Some are quite structured, like ours is, which is, with advisors and a defined cohort of students, sometimes taking the classes just with each other and not mixed in with the undergraduates or anything. And have extracurricular and co-curricular things and ways to get volunteering. And, they're quite structured. And then others are much more open, and they call themselves post-baccalaureate programs because they're offering courses to post-bacs, but they don't have the infrastructure that Elizabeth and I are talking about at our schools in terms of advising. So you're kind of taking the courses on your own and then hopefully relying on other sources to get support, from other places. So they vary. I don't know, does that give you a sense of things?
I wanted to ask you too, since you've done work with the AAMC as a part of the post-bac kind of community, is there a central repository where all these programs are listed or that students can go find them versus going out and trying to Google programs and just putting it together?
There is, and I think the reason I say the definition of post-bac is kind of slippery is because the database that the WMC has is quite large. I mean, I think there are at least over 100, maybe even over 200 of these programs in the country that call themselves post-bac, and you can find it at the WMC website. There's if you just search for post-bac, they have a nice page with other material as well. Like I think they have some resources on considering a post-baccalaureate program, what to think of. And then they have a database of all the programs, and they contact us fairly regularly to update the information that we have there. So you can be confident that the information there in the database is relatively current about the programs.
Yeah. So I'll be sure to put links in the show notes to that database and that link to considering post-bac. Elizabeth, so how do these differ from the master's programs or these special masters?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one thing I want to mention about, I guess all of these really kind of fall into the enhancement category. And we have in our program a pretty good number of people who are doing a traditional enhancement track. So they're taking additional undergraduate coursework in the sciences, usually upper level biology work. And something that students don't always know, prospective students don't always know when they first come in to talk with me, is how a post-bac helps them. So if they're doing a traditional enhancement post-bac, doing undergraduate work, it actually does move their GPA. So something that might be helpful for listeners to take a look at is, I think one thing that you'll be posting a link to is called the AMCAS Grade Conversion Guide. And that will show you exactly how the medical school application services are going to kind of slice and dice your academic record and present it to med schools. And if you're applying to osteopathic programs, ACOMAS is going to do the same thing with a slight difference. The DO calculation for science GPA is just biology, chemistry, physics. For allopathic programs, it's biology, chemistry, physics, and math. But otherwise, the weights for the grades are the same. The way that they put things in different categories is the same. So if you look at the grade conversion guide, med schools are going to get this synopsis of what your science GPA was for each year of college, and then for post-bac work, and then what your all other work was, which, if you majored in something other than a science, there's going to be a lot there. And then your total GPA. And then you'll see underneath that, there's going to be a cumulative undergraduate science GPA and a cumulative undergraduate total GPA. And that's your undergrad work plus post-bac if you're doing undergraduate, work in your post-bac, all rolled together. And those are the key numbers, So if you're looking at the MSAR, that gives you data about, what's the 10th to 90th percentile for this school for admitted students, for GPA, or for science GPA. These are the numbers that are being used and the numbers that are most important. So doing these additional post-bac courses does actually, if you've been on an upward trend already, if you've been working on improving, it's showing, sustained improvement, it's extending that trend, but it's also mathematically moving your GPA. So I think one of the, tough things is to try to evaluate if you're in a situation where you need to improve your record and show that you're ready for, the medical school curriculum. How do you do that? And, the answer may differ depending on what your starting point is when you finish college. There are lots and lots of master's programs. There are plenty in the post-bac database on the AAMC website that are, masters in science of one type or another, many out there at schools that are not listed in that database. But what any general masters in science will do is it will show schools that you can handle a heavy load of upper level science work. It'll demonstrate your genuine interest in science. It may give them evidence of your maturity, that you've, really persisted in this, that you've spent extra time investing in this. But I think the difficulty is in graduate programs in general, there's not as much differentiation in GPA from student to student. Most graduate students tend to do well. So I think it's harder for med schools to evaluate your relative performance, and it's harder for them to really discern, what does that 3.7 or 3.8 in a master's program mean? So
I've heard that from other admissions people. Yeah.
I've heard that many times. I would say one of the exceptions is if you're planning on applying to dental school. One thing we found talking to lots and lots of schools is that often dental schools would rather see a master's than see undergraduate post-bac work. So it's worth, if that's your goal, really talking with your state school or a few of your, top choice schools to see what they would rather see you do.
Go ahead. I was just going to mention, you give an excellent description of that GPA kind of breakdown. And that's why, and you're saying that a post-bac program can move the needle in that GPA, that undergraduate GPA, which is important because that's what they see in the statistics when our matriculating data from med schools is sucked out and put into things like MSAR. That's the entering classes undergraduate GPA. They don't factor in any graduate GPA. So it's people don't always know that. And I've met some people that have gone on to do master's programs because they thought that was going to boost their undergraduate GPA. Right. And there's not, the way AMCAS is set up, there's not like an overall GPA for everything. And so I think to be clear that the post-bac factors into that undergrad. So, which is the one that's pulled out.
If I can just jump in for a second.
Yeah, of course.
The other thing that I always, with the master's degree decision, that often comes up when you talk to undergraduates that are looking at doing it as a booster to help them get into medical school, is that, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll have a master's degree. And isn't that practical, right? And isn't that a practical choice?
Yes.
Well, if I don't get medical school, it is on some level, but I do think you need to pause and think about what you'd want to do with that master's degree. There's kind of a quick knee-jerk reaction sometimes of, well, that's my plan B. I'll have a master's degree if plan A doesn't work out. But you need to figure out what you're going to do with that degree. Is it really going to, are you talking about then going on and getting a doctorate in a PhD in the science, or are there jobs out there that are requiring that master's exactly? Because I think there's sometimes it's just an assumption that we kind of need to explore a little bit about whether or not a master's is, going to serve you very well in other ways. I think it's different, obviously, in different disciplines. I mean, I came out of the humanities, and the difference between a master's and a PhD in the humanities is quite different. I mean, if you just have the master's, I don't know that it's a credential that really gets you places you might want to go.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad you said that, Glenn. And I don't want people to think that we're diminishing master's degrees at all. Like, I think we're trying to explain to people the differentiation and how it plays into just the gamesmanship of this crazy application process, and the ways that students need to kind of approach this and think about what their current situation is and what program might be best suited for them. And then what their ultimate goals are. Like you said, Glenn, like, okay, so it's great. Like, yeah, you spend 2 years doing a master's. You'll always have that on your resume. But if it doesn't work out, what do other people do with this master's degree if they're not going to medical school? What do they use it for? I think those are questions to maybe ask those programs.
Exactly.
I think, one of the big considerations in this is you really have to think about what your starting point is. And, we often recommend that students calculate their own GPA figures. One thing to be aware of is wherever you have gone to school, they may have different weights for grades than AMCAS and ACOMAS. So, at some schools, an A- is a 3.7, at some it's a 3.65. So you really need to, get the guide and plug in all of your numbers and see where you stand, and then see how much a traditional post-bac can move that needle. If you take 30 credits and you have a 3.5 or you have a 4.0, is that going to be enough to get you in a reasonable range for the schools that you're wanting to apply to? And if not, if you're really, really far off the mark, then that's where I think sometimes it does make sense to look at a master's. And there's a type of master's that we haven't talked about yet that I want to, go into a little bit.
Please do.
And those are called special master's programs. And so, some listeners may have heard of these. Basically, what distinguishes a special master's from, the other masters out there is that these are housed in medical schools. And really the distinguishing feature is that students get to take med school courses. So if you've really got a considerable GPA gap to close and you've got a lot of credits of science and it's going to take you, 60 credits or something of A work to get out of that hole, then a special master's is a different way to demonstrate your readiness. So in a special master's, you would be able to take those med school courses and essentially show, that you are ready to perform in that curriculum. I think the tough thing about them is that they're high stakes and high reward. So, if you're very well prepared, it could be a terrific route. And often you have, benefits to being in one of these programs, like, having a guaranteed interview to that med school, if you have certain performance. But I think also, the flip side of that is if you don't do well in that type of program, then you've unfortunately demonstrated that you're not ready for med school.
Yeah. Oh boy. Great points. I mean, that's a great way to really detail that out. What about when people are thinking, because you theoretically, and Elizabeth, you kind of mentioned this when you were just describing how WashU program began, is that people recognize that you can cobble together your own quote unquote post-bac program by looking at your local university's course offerings and saying, well, I could fit this into my schedule. I need Gen Chem, I need general biology, and go and I can map that out and just do it from a program. It's in my backyard, but it's not formalized. I'm just doing it on a continuing ed kind of way. What's the benefits of doing a formalized post-bac program versus kind of an a la carte on your own set of coursework? Glenn, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Granted, I'm one of those programs, so I'm a little biased probably, but they're.
Well, that's why you're here.
And I don't know if one's better than the other necessarily. It just depends on what your resources are, and it depends on what your personal life demands are, and all these other things that are part of life. But the structured program where you're in a program either part-time or full-time, but there is structure to it, usually does have an advising component, and I think that is really huge. When you are a little bit older and you're taking what's a less traditional path to medical school, to have someone who has seen, the picture from 10,000 feet of, the people coming through a program over a period of time, and maybe even have data to show for that.
Some outcomes.
At least to have a sense of the profile of students like you who have succeeded is really helpful when you're trying to present yourself in the best light, to a medical school when you go to apply. So having that, some sort of expertise on staff in your program that you can meet with regularly. Also to talk about, academic strategies for success. Quite a few post-bacs are a little uneasy about science. They've either had a less than positive experience in college with the science they've taken, or the career changers often haven't had science since high school. So there's a big gap in time, and to have someone who can talk to you about, what was working in your major in college maybe isn't working as well in, organic chemistry, or, why is that? Are you studying in groups too much? Are you like a social butterfly and just constantly getting together with your classmates and you're not doing the work? Or are you isolating yourselves and thinking that what worked for your classics major in college, is supposed to work when you're taking quantitative science, so like having someone on staff to really help with those advising questions is a big difference between the two. And then, like, I think we've kind of already talked a little bit about the community that you get with your peers if you're in a more structured program, and just for moral support. I think it's really exciting to be around people that you basically all have the same goal, and you often have similar values, similar interests, and some maturity added to it. And you don't have the distractions that you had in college, which were, all over the place in terms of extracurricular activities and just growing up and all the things you're doing in college. And it can be really fun to be in a cohort with people that have those shared values. Like I know at Bryn Mawr, a lot of lifelong friendships start the year they're with us. We've had people start lifelong relationships. We've had people come back to our organic chemistry lab and propose to get married because that's what they had. And I just, that's a really unique kind of transformative experience that you're not getting if you do the courses usually, a la carte by yourself. It is often less expensive to do them a la carte by themselves. And sometimes, with the flex, sometimes you just don't have the luxury of not being able to, or not having to work, and keep a job. So doing these courses over several years, a la carte while you're holding down another job or raising your kids or whatever you're doing, is, I think, you could probably tell us better, Christian, but on the other end, if the transcript, it kind of speaks for itself, and if the transcript is strong, maybe it doesn't matter so much in the end, but it usually takes longer, and you're missing some of the components of a more structured program that I personally think are pretty valuable.
Yeah. I'll give you my perspective after I ask Elizabeth, is there anything else you would add to that, Elizabeth?
Well, I think, as with a lot of decisions in life, it comes down in many ways to whether you're prioritizing your time or your finances, whether it's important to you to move quickly and be in med school as quickly as possible, or whether, you need to take a more measured approach and try to do it bit by bit, which is certainly possible. The category in the GPA for post-bac work, that doesn't mean a structured program. That can be anything that you take at the undergraduate level after you've completed your bachelor's.
Yes.
So it's going to have the same mathematical, impact. I would say one thing that's important for people to consider if they're going to do it themselves is that typically, it's better to do your prerequisites at a 4-year college or university. So that's not to say that there aren't some terrific 2-year schools out there, but I think there are just so many and they're so variable that it's harder for med schools to gauge, the robustness of that preparation. We recommend that students do it at a 4-year school. And there are, ways to do it on your own. I think it really comes down to also evaluating what you really need. Is it, your grades are pretty strong, but you really need time to prepare for the MCAT. Some people might want to be in classes so they can take some more electives that are going to be helpful content for the test. And, they've got more structure. But a lot of people may just want to say, all right, I'm going to put myself on a schedule. I'm going to get these resources, or I'm going to sign up for a prep course, and here's my goal. You certainly can do it that way. We sometimes have applicants to our program who look pretty strong already, and we may admit them and then counsel them, hey, you know what? You are welcome to come, but we don't think you need us. Here's a way to do it, and here's another way to do it. Yeah. And, you might want to stay where you are, where you've got a network or you've got family. Sometimes if you're staying where you've got, somebody that you can lean on to say, hey, you know what, can I move back home for a while I do this? Right. That can be really valuable.
Right.
The other thing I want to mention is that for people who are planning and they truly don't have any resources as far as advising, that the NAAHP does have help. So the National Association for Advisors for the Health Professions, and I think we'll have a link to that up. You can actually go and sign up and ask for a volunteer pre-health advisor to help you. It's not for people who have a pre-health advisor from, their college already or a post-bac program, but for people who truly are kind of on their own, trying to make this work. I think that's a terrific resource. That's
been mentioned multiple times by other people we've had on this podcast. And I can't keep, we are all advocates for it, right? Like we are all trying to get people to know that that resource is out there. I mean, this is a common question that I get from prospective applicants when they're talking about post-bac programs. Is it better for me to have one from a program such as yours? Or what do you think if I just have kind of cobbled this together from a local university that doesn't have a formalized program? What do you think? And I always tell I've seen students be successful both ways. And it ultimately comes down to kind of what both of you were saying was, do you like the idea of having some structure around you, have built-in advising? Because I think one thing that you both would agree is like you, as an applicant, you don't know what you don't know in this process. Mm-hmm. And if you have an advisor that's in the program right there that is kind of holding your hand through this process and kind of helping you step through it, I think there's some value there in just being a part of a formalized program. Also, I mean, there's some advantage. I think you guys both write letters of recommendation for your students, right. Which Absolutely. I think holds some value there. But that said, the student that's cobbling this together can get probably strong letters from instructors that they've gotten to know, but it's going to take that extra effort, I think, to then strike up that relationship with that instructor from a particular course. And that's not always easy either. So, but at the end of the day, I've seen people be successful with both types, whether it's formalized or a more kind of a la carte kind of way of doing it. But I know I'd like to see the data. I guess I wish that we could find some data like formalized versus, a la carte and see if there's like, have you guys ever seen any data about that? Or is that even collected?
No, that would be interesting.
No. Yeah. It'd be something maybe at the med school level you could do with your entering class, look at at least in one class or maybe over 3 years or something, you could look at the people coming in, how did they do their coursework and then break it down that way. I don't know. One thing that we're not talking about too, or we not much is that I would want to look at if I were looking at different types of programs and then also maybe not doing a program at all and just doing it on your own is access or means by which to get volunteer experiences in the community. And
what do you shop for?
Yeah. What do you shop for? I mean, I think it's obviously difficult for someone who's working, especially if it's not in a health related profession. I mean, if they're working something in a completely different industry or whatever, to continue to remind themselves of why they want to be a physician, and to be out there in a clinical setting, maybe at least a few hours every week, volunteering in some way. And the structured programs usually have mechanisms and they have relationships, liaison, they serve as a little bit of a liaison between their program and the larger community in the city in which they're located. And they kind of know the places that former students have had rewarding experiences, volunteering. And it's fine. I mean, you can find those things on your own too. It's the same kind of thing. It just may take a little more work. I mean, everyone knows when you go to volunteer at a hospital that the bureaucratic chain of events you have to go through can be really extensive, and you just need to prepare for that. And I'm sure people do it all the time, but it is a feature of our programs that we help you with if you're in one of the structured programs. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth, anything to add to people that are shopping? What should they be keeping in mind or looking for that might help them make that decision to choose a more formalized program over kind of going it alone?
Well, I think you can also look at finances in another way because a lot of structured programs provide access to financial aid. So, that's something that may enable a student to take a break from work or step back to part-time to really focus on coursework. But it is important to really compare as you're looking at programs and ask details about how much financial aid is available and for how long, because that really can vary. And ask about scholarships. We have need and merit-based scholarships, and that's something that's not available everywhere.
I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. There you go. Like, I didn't know that. I didn't know you guys are offered. I mean, I like merit-based scholarships too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have a scholarship named for James L. Sweat, who was the first African-American graduate of the WashU School of Medicine. And so this is a merit scholarship for students with a 3.5 or better who also have a demonstrated record of service and bridging divides, bringing communities together, or students who have really overcome substantial personal hurdles, being first generation, things like that.
Do you, either of you, hear from prospective applicants to your programs of applicants wanting to know if they're going to be interacting with a lot of general undergraduate population, or are they in separate classes with just their post-bac group?
It varies. I think, right, Elizabeth? I mean, I think we are different in that regard in how we do things. We've gotten feedback over the years from the post-bacs who come through that they would generally prefer to be with their own cohort for a variety of different reasons. I mean, the undergraduates at Bryn Mawr are wonderful. A lot of them are headed into health professions as well, but they're on a different timeline. They just have different things that they're involved in with college. And this idea of community that I was talking about before, I think really forms when the post-bacs are with each other. So, I mean, the way our program is all of their lectures are post-bac only, and most of their labs are post-bac only, but they do interact with the undergraduates in some of the labs, and that allows us to offer a lot more times for labs. So the schedule is a lot more flexible when we do it that way. And I do think there's some benefit for them interacting with each other, especially if you're a lab partner with an undergraduate and she's destined to be a biochem major. She might not be a bad lab partner to have. So I always tell them that there are ways that the interactions are great. But I think our programs vary in that regard, and I think some of the post-bac programs, for whatever practical reasons that the institution can't change or whatever, they do put them all together in one class. But that's something you want to look at and you want to think about.
Yeah, that's a common question that we get as well. And for us, the students really get to choose, because if they decide to take day courses, they will be in class with WashU undergrads. If they're opting for evening courses, that's where they'll really be with a group of other post-bacs. And I think there is, like Glenn said, a just nice camaraderie when, you're studying with people who've had a longer path and a different route, people who have really similar values and goals to what you have. We actually have a book group that our students decided to do that just kind of happened organically, and they meet about every 6 weeks, and they read something like a physician memoir, things that are relevant to what they're going to be doing, yet not chemistry.
Right. Yeah. A little bit of a
and
break.
That's just a nice indication of just kind of how people band together.
Yeah. We have all sorts of those kind of, I don't know if you want us to talk about those, but the ways the post-bacs have fun. It does happen. You do have fun sometimes.
There's time to have fun.
Yeah, no.
Absolutely. You have to build that in. I mean, I frequently tell my students, we expect that you're going to work hard, but we also want you to, just not combust. We want to be sure there's some balance. What are you doing for self-care?
Right.
And having connections is a big part of that.
Right. No, I get a little preachy sometimes with my students when they have an outside interest that we saw in their application when they applied that obviously helps them keep healthy physically or emotionally or spiritually or something, and then they're not doing it when they're in our program, and when I talk to them about it, they'll say sometimes, well, I understand, but I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to study all year and get into medical school. And then I'll pick the cello back up, or I'll pick my tennis racket back up, or when I get to medical school. Yeah.
Don't put it on the shelf.
And don't put it on the shelf. And, as the director of the program, I think a lot about their ability to just their wellness, their general wellness, and their ability long-term when they get into medicine to balance their personal interests with their professional goals, and I kind of think of our program as a little bit of a dress rehearsal for medical school. So if they're not working those things out while they're in our program, it's not going to get any easier
Yeah.
I mean, the curriculum of medical school is not any easier than what we're doing. So
Yeah.
we have committees. We have a social committee and a sports committee and a music committee the students come together in different groups around those interests. We have Post-Bac which you might,
nice.
You might be able to guess what that is. We have a literary arts journal that I started a few years ago. So, we try to build in as many, extracurricular things. And then I meet with them individually and just make sure that if they have some interest that they want to pursue that doesn't fit under one of these categories, that I try to help them, find an outlet in Philadelphia to take up ballroom dancing or whatever they do for fun.
Yeah.
I think another really good outlet is if students have chosen a good service activity.
Right.
We definitely want them to be spending their time with things that they can really be invested in and feel are important. And I really encourage students, to think about what they're going to enjoy doing. Because hopefully, if you can't wait to get to the Humane Society to walk dogs, and that's going to be a break from chemistry, that's a really healthy balance to your life, right? Also, I want them to be thinking about their narrative as they're deciding how to spend their time. So, one of the ways that I think students communicate with medical schools when they apply is, the record of how they've spent their time. That says something about what your priorities are and what your values are. And that can really help with finding the schools that are a good fit for you.
So to kind of recap, what I'm hearing is the benefits of having a formalized program. It comes down to access, obviously, to advisors like you. You just were talking about the things you meet with them, your help guiding them and making sure that they're taking care of themselves while working hard. And there's access to the social life and wellness activities and research opportunities and volunteering experience where you can direct kids to say, hey, we've sent other students here and here's some shadowing, look into these places. So there's a lot of, not to say you can't do this on your own, but I hope what people are hearing is that it's a big undertaking. But to have some of these amenities in a formalized program kind of right there and you're able to kind of help guide them to them, I think is just, because this is high stakes stuff and it's not always cheap. And so I think you want to kind of weigh that, what's the return on investment for doing a program like this?
I think it can also be really difficult to self-assess when you're in the middle of this process. If you've been working on this for such a long time and, making incremental progress, I think sometimes it's really helpful to have kind of, an external point of view. Sometimes I'll be having a conversation with a student and, they might be having a really difficult week and saying, I'm doubting whether I can do this. So part of our role sometimes is to say, you know what, you're here. We admitted you because we really believe in you. We really think you can get there. Look at what you've done so far. So sometimes having a good frame of reference is really helpful. Now, there are times when, we have had students who've struggled in the program. And, when it gets to the point that they are about to apply to medical school, we're having meetings and we're kind of doing an assessment and talking about how prepared they are. And there are times I've had to say to a student, I think if you go forward now, you would be a risky applicant. So, I'd rather them hear it from me than, go and have a terrible cycle. But, most of the time our students are coming in and thriving and, our role gets to be really, being an advocate and a supporter and kind of, reminding them of how much they've done and, how well they're doing.
Yeah. That cheerleader role, that's the best part of my job by far,
Yeah,
whether it's writing that, whether it's, advocating for them a little bit in the committee letter or just talking to them about, like Elizabeth saying, talking to them about, how to assess how you're doing, or whatever it is. I just love that. We have, it's amazing to me, at least in the in our career changer program like ours, how much they have going for them in the way of professionalism that they don't necessarily realize they have.
Good point.
They come into our program anywhere from, age 22 to 35 usually.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the older ones that are in their late 20s or early 30s. I mean, we've had students that were soldiers deployed to Afghanistan. You know, we've had Peace Corps volunteers and people that taught in a variety of different school districts over a long period of time. We had hospital chaplains. You know, I had a professional actress in our program. You know, and sometimes it takes someone else to point out to them how they're a lot of transferable skills.
I was just going to say transferable skills. Yeah,
I mean, they're really impressive little. Well, not always little, sometimes big careers that they've had before they came to us. But they don't realize how handy some of the things they've learned in terms of just handling stress and working with other people and managing their time, and speaking publicly and doing all these things. I mean, how important that's going to be in medicine. So sometimes it takes somebody else to just, say, hey, you're pretty cool.
Don't discredit this, right? Yeah, don't discredit your previous life experience or employment experience. I have to tell you, there's quite a few of non-traditional students that listen to this podcast, and I'm so glad for you to bring these things up because I want them to hear that whatever their previous employment was or their life before what they're doing now as a potential applicant to medical school really matters. And there's, like you said, a lot of transferable skills that you can take with them and see as an advantage in the future application process. One thing I wanted to ask you, Glenn, when you're mentioning about coursework and that at Bryn Mawr in particular, it's 1 year long, how do you get biochem? If somebody's coming in who's the former actress who they were a theater major and had a life in theater and employment in theater. Now they're coming to you and saying, I want to be a doctor. And I have to take Gen Chem, OChem, and then eventually get the biochem. How does that work?
Well, it's a challenge, and the more important biochemistry has become in recent years, I think the more 1 year programs have experimented with different ways of getting it in. We have a way that I think works pretty well, which is that our general biology class, which is a year-long course, is taught by a professor. She's designated purely to just the post-bac program. She's very interested in the MCAT that they're going to have to take, and the content that they need to, the competencies that they need to be able to demonstrate. So she integrates biochemistry into the entire year of biology. So, it's technically called introductory biology, but it's taught it's not your typical
bio 101 kind of thing. Okay.
No, it's taught at a much higher level. And then, we want to make sure med schools are okay with what we're doing. And so the second half of organic chemistry in the spring is actually called biological organic chemistry. And it shows up on their transcript that way. And the professor of that course doesn't necessarily integrate it as much as this year. The professor teaching it is stopping right about now, right around spring break, and she is teaching 6 or 7 weeks. I can't remember. I think it's 6 of biochemistry at the end of the year. So when they go to apply to medical school, let's say this coming summer or something, we, with their committee letter, put a description of our curriculum in their packet with them, so that, and then we give them language to use themselves when they're applying to describe how they've gotten biochemistry. And it's been working. And we've been doing this really since the MCAT changed. So is that
2015
5 years now? And medical schools by and large are saying, okay. I mean, I know there's at least one medical school out there that gives a biochemistry competency assessment when they arrive, when they matriculate, and our students are passing it, we're doing well in the MCAT and all that kind of stuff. So it seems to be working, but it's a challenge to get it into 1 year. Yeah.
Elizabeth, do you have any coursework challenges that you hear from your students? Because you have different flavors, like you kind of explained how the WashU program works. Is there any challenges they run into?
Yeah, I would say something for people to think about if they're planning to launch this process is they can really work on their math background before they get started in a formal program. That tends to be one of the biggest variations for students in our program because they really need to have at least a semester of calculus in order to do our calc-based physics sequence. So they can, come to us without pre-calc and take it here. But it really helps them move forward faster if they already have had pre-calc or even a semester of calc.
Good point. What about stats?
Stats is really helpful.
Okay.
I think it's one of those things that, you want to have as a competency as a physician. But, math requirements vary so much from school to school as far as med schools. So, it's something we make available, but we don't require.
Before we get into kind of the application process and admissions process for getting into your programs, I want to also, another one of those amenities that can come along with a formalized post-bac program are things called linkages, and where you have relationships with some medical schools and kind of almost like pipeline programs to those medical schools. You both have them. Does one of you want to go first to kind of explain what they are and who you have linkages with? I'm going to flip a coin.
It doesn't matter.
Glenn, go.
I can. First of all, they're not all linkages are not created equally. So, I mean, they do differ a little bit in terms because we're definitely happy to be partners with a medical school. And we kind of try to work with the medical school to go on a timeline that they want us to go on and meet criteria that they determine. So, and you're all different, right? So, I mean, you all have different, but generally speaking, a linkage is a partnership with a medical school that allows the student then to apply while they're in our program. And if it works and they're conditionally accepted and then they finish the year with us as strong as they started it, then they can start medical school right away when they finish the program. Otherwise, they're applying that summer to go to medical school, but they wouldn't be going until the following year. So that, there's a glide year. So, especially for an older student, the linkage thing can be quite attractive because it moves them along quicker into medical school. We have linkages with, like I said before, a lot of schools. Right now, I don't know if you probably, an applicant would want to look at our website and just see the list.
We'll put links to there. Yeah.
There are 18 schools right now. They're in the Midwest and the Northeast mostly, although I'm always looking to expand that. And they all have some sort of academic credential that the student needs to be eligible. And, I always tell the students that are interested in linkage that they don't just need to meet that GPA threshold or whatever it is, but they really should think about trying to exceed it. Because from the medical's point of view, I think I'm right in saying that when you're trying to link, you're coming into the application process toward the end, when they're
peaking at the right time.
And the medical's looking for applicants that are really strong and that they don't have to worry about too much. So like Elizabeth was saying before, when you have to have that difficult conversation with someone about maybe this isn't the best time to be applying. I have difficult conversations sometimes with my students about maybe this isn't the right linkage for you. We have visits that we schedule in the fall to most of our linkage partners. And so the students get a chance to go if they want to and visit the school and meet some former Bryn Mawr Post-Bacs that might be there or some other students that are there. And they come back from those trips, really excited about going to medical school, which is so much fun. But maybe the school they're most excited about is not the best fit for them sometimes, or maybe they're excited about 4 different schools, and that's an indication that they belong in medical school, but it may not be an indication that they should be linking.
The linkage is the right.
So there's a lot of, again, a lot of advising that goes into this process, but that's just kind of a general overview. Some of them, most of them, right now at least, are requiring the MCAT, but there are a few linkage programs that actually waive the MCAT, which is also really attractive, obviously, to some students. I think that's kind of a decision that the medical school just needs to make very consciously. And the ones that are nice enough to do that for us, there's been a history of Bryn Mawr Post-Bacs going to that medical school that is strong enough that they just feel confident with that very privileged thing that they're allowing our students to do. But they're usually some of our older partners, and they're usually partners that just have had a lot of Bryn Mawr Post-Bacs in their class every year, and feel confident that they're going to do well, because of course the MCAT is an indicator of that. So
absolutely. Yeah. Elizabeth, what are your comments and the pros and cons of linkages?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they can be a really great pathway when the fit is there. I think what students have to realize, one is they have to really establish a good record in their post-bac program. We sometimes have people who call and ask us about our linkages, and they want to apply to link as they're arriving on campus.
Oh, gosh.
And,
exactly.
The basis of the linkage is that the med school has confidence in our curriculum and the rigor. Yeah. And so,
we try not to take it personally when they're trying to leave us the minute they arrive.
Yes. No, we realize we're a stepping stone, but, even so, but we have to get to know them, and they have to establish a record with us before we can put them forward as a linkage candidate. So, linkages certainly aren't for everybody. There may not be a linkage with the school or schools that you're most interested in, or the type of place that you want to go. So you really have to be sure, because linkages are binding, that when you're making a choice to move forward, that really is where you want to be. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that linkages are not a shortcut. It's not a way to bandage over a shortcoming. If you really need to improve your GPA, or you really need to improve your MCAT, you will have to do the hard work to do that. So, we have linkages with the University of Michigan and with Case Western. And for, the linkage we have with you at Case, the MCAT is not required, but this is not a way for students to, kind of hide if they've taken it and not done well. In fact, they would be disqualified if they've taken it. So, I think there are a lot of things that weigh into that decision. We're happy to talk to students and prospective students about the linkage pathway. We also are, interested in expanding our linkage partnerships, and we have a third that we are working on finalizing now that hopefully we'll be able to announce before too long. But
so stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned. But each linkage agreement that we have, is very different. So it's about finding, what criteria you fit with, and also what school really makes sense for you.
Yeah. Before we kind of get into the admissions process and kind of wrap up this discussion we've had about what these programs are like and what they entail and what they offer, I want people to hear that the majority of medical schools really value our, what you might want to call our non-traditional or post-bac students to our programs. Because generally these students sometimes are a little bit older, and like Glenn kind of mentioned, they're coming from different backgrounds. And so it adds some diversity to our classes in different ways. And some of them bring different skill sets and characteristics that add to, if we're doing a lot of small group learning, you're bringing some different things to the table that I think makes for a dynamic and enriching learning environment. So sometimes I hear on my end from post-bac students or non-traditional students that are applicants that they feel like they're at a disadvantage because they're not coming right out of undergrad, and that they're seen differently. And I would have to say, I think, see your pathway to medical school as an advantage. And don't see yourself as at being at a disadvantage because you're not coming directly from undergrad. We see all kinds of applicants coming from different pathways, and there's not one way to do it. But I want people to hear that from my perspective and a med school level. Have you guys heard that too from your friends at other med school admissions offices or something similar?
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
I think, on the one hand, the bar for post-bacs is the same in terms of, needing to show that they're academically ready. On the other hand, they really can distinguish themselves because they have had a lot of different experiences. And generally they bring, a lot more experience working with people, a lot greater maturity than the average 21-year-old applicant. They've done and seen a lot of things, and they often, really, really know with certainty that this is what they belong in. And that can be very valuable.
I mean, their choice of medicine is so deliberate. That's what I always say. That and it's not that I'm sure the more traditional undergraduate hasn't given some thought to his or her decision to enter medicine. But when there's potentially a little bit more at stake, or when potentially they've had to do some post-bac work, whatever it looks like, or especially if they've had been in another industry and then come to medicine, they often are worried that it's going to look like they're not committed. And I find it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
And once you help them express themselves, their choice is actually quite conscious and very deliberate to do this. And so when the medical schools are looking for motivation, what motivates this person, they have a lot to talk about.
If a post-bac student can kind of help us connect those dots as to where their thought processes have gone to the point where they're now applying to medical school, I think that if they can do that for us, it helps us understand. And I see the same thing, Glenn, where I've had post-bac students say, I mean, how do I prove to you that I'm really into this? I'm like, boy, you've quit your job and you put all your chips into doing this coursework for the last year or two. I kind of think that you've thought about this and probably had some conversations with family or spouses or, partners to do this, because it's a big sacrifice. And for some, versus like maybe sometimes we see some undergraduate students, just seems like the next natural step to go from undergrad to med school. And many are successful and some aren't. But I just feel that there's always, sometimes talking to post-bac students who are not traditional, that they feel they're seen differently. And like Elizabeth said, they're held to the same bar academically as others. But there's sometimes a lot of other characteristics and attributes that really can put them sometimes over the finish line.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk really quickly about what the application process is like. Is there a centralized application for post-bac programs, or are they applying individually to your programs, like through your own kind of in-house application process? What's that look like?
So there is a common application system that's been around for a few years now, and we participate in the CAS.
Okay, it's called CAS, C-A-S?
Okay. Common application system. And Glenn can speak, to that in greater detail. But we also have an application on our website. So, we know that we do have some applicants who maybe are more local, or, they're applying to fewer programs. And so we wanted to have that avenue still open so that they could apply directly to us. I think one of the advantages of the CAS system is that you can send in your transcripts once, you can upload your materials, your letters one time, and you can designate a variety of programs. And, it kind of is nicely managed for you. I think the downside is, certainly not all programs are on it. I think it's fairly expensive. There's a fee to just submit your application, and then there's a fee for adding each program. And then I think at the next stage, programs can choose or not, to add an additional fee. So, it really depends on, how many programs you're planning to apply to and exactly what your list looks like.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. There are post-bac CAS is what it's called. And there are now 50, I think it's right at 50 post-bac programs that are participating as of now in the CAS. So it isn't all the programs, but the programs that are in there are certainly of all different types. It's not any just one type of program. But someone who's looking to apply, should probably start with something like the AAMC database, make a list of programs they're interested in, and then they might be in a situation where some of them they have to go through the post-bac CAS and some of them they don't, which is a little more complicated. There are fee waivers that applicants can ask for, and each one of our the programs that are involved in post-bac CAS have a part of the application where they can put up distinguishing features of their particular program. And most of us have a message there in some way saying, contact us if you can't afford it. I mean, if you can't afford this, contact us. And we can, on our end, with a little demonstrated need on the applicant's part, we can sometimes help them with the application fee.
Okay,
So
that's good.
So that is nice to know. So that's how it works. We all have different start dates too. So in terms of, in medical school, the season of applying is pretty well determined. But for post-bac programs, we some of us start in the summer. Some of us have a summer start date and a winter start date. Some of us, you can start every semester, whenever that is. I mean, it really varies. And so when you might be using Post-Bac Cast or when you might be putting in an application differs from program to program. So the best thing to think about is, well, when do you want to start your program? When do you want to start it? And then work backwards from that and find programs that kind of have
Elizabeth, what's your timeline?
So we actually are one of the programs that allows students to start any semester. So we have a fall start in late August, January start, middle of January, and a summer start the second week of June. And we have a fairly late application deadline. It's April 1 for summer, and it's June 21st for fall, because we know there are going to be people who are perhaps applying to med school and it's not working out. And they're realizing, in April or May that they need a plan B.
Right. And Glenn, what's your timeline like? Because you're a summer start, right?
Right. Well, we start roughly June 1st or right around Memorial Day. So our application deadline is usually February 15th, right in the middle of February sometime. But the application opens up August. The August before that. So our admission cycles from fall all the way through the winter. And then right now we're winding down.
Okay. And so now I think people need to know that too, that some post-bac programs interview applicants, right?
Right.
And so do both of you interview your applicants? Require an interview? Okay, so WashU, you don't require an interview.
We certainly are happy to meet with prospective students and applicants if they want to come in, if they want to talk, if they want to take a campus tour, but we don't require an interview.
Okay. And Glenn, do you?
We do. And we prefer that they do it at Bryn Mawr if they can, but we have Skype. We always have Skype interviews as an option for people that just can't afford to come to Philadelphia, or certainly people that are abroad or international locations. But we have a whole interview day set up where they get to meet students and have lunch with the students and sit in on a class and then have a conversation with one of our staff.
Yeah. So let's kind of put your advisor and program director hat to the side. Now put on your admissions hat. What things are you guys looking for in your potential students that you want to bring into your programs?
Elizabeth, you want to take this one? Or?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, one thing is we want to know that the applicant is making a well-considered decision. So that means we want to see that they have been doing some community service, that they've been working in a healthcare field or volunteering in a healthcare setting or shadowing. We want to see that they have started to get an idea of what they're getting into and started to build the experience that they'll need to move forward. The other thing we're really looking for is evidence that we think they'll be successful in our coursework. And so, that's not to say that, if you've had some rough grades that, you're just counted out, but, we're reading the application holistically. If there's been a rough period, we want to see progression. We want to see improvement. For people who are applying and submitting letters of recommendation, we take professional recommendations. If you need to get a letter from a supervisor or a physician you've shadowed, that's fine. But for people who are working on improving their academics, one of the best things you can do is to get faculty letters, get a letter from somebody who's seen you in a recent course where you've done well, or somebody who's seen you improve over time.
Right. We actually require one academic letter.
Okay.
We just feel like their background as a student is really important. There are three main questions we ask. Can they do the work?
Okay.
what motivates them,
Okay.
and who have they served? I mean, who have they helped?
So some similarities there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, not to reduce it to just three things, but I mean, those are the three overarching things that we're kind of looking at. So
as when you put on your admissions hat, I mean, we had a call last week to kind of get organized a little bit, and you guys had me cracking up about some of the things that you've seen and heard, and talking about how these programs are an opportunity for potential med students to be practicing their professionalism and on you, right? Because you're evaluating them. What challenges do you see run into as advisors and as admissions roles?
Well, I think it's good for prospective students to do a little bit of homework before they reach out to us, because there's a lot of information that's readily available. Take a look at our website, read up a little bit. We certainly welcome questions, but I had a prospective applicant ask me once if Washington University in St. Louis has a medical school. And we have a quite selective, excellent medical school.
I've heard of them.
You may have. It would have taken seconds to find that out before the person picked up the phone. And so, to me, that makes an impression that, perhaps this person is not tremendously invested, or, just has not done a lot of, background work and has not had a lot of initiative in this process.
Mm-hmm. Glenn, what have you seen? What are your challenges? Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're looking at them so soon before you're looking at them, right? I mean, so I'm sure some of the same challenges you have in admissions are the same challenges we have a year earlier or 2 years earlier. But certainly, just not taking the interview, because we do ask for that interview, so we get to meet them. I mean, not taking the interview very seriously. Whipping off the application in, a few minutes. And, it's very obvious to see that they just didn't spend so much time with that, or just not looking at what our requirements are. I mean, I just mentioned the letter from someone who's taught them, like an academic letter is one of the things we ask for, and just pretending we didn't ask for it, just sending in an application that doesn't have it.
Okay.
And I understand there's a challenge there to get it. But it's just one example of something where they need to step back and show us that they're aware of not only what might be asking for in terms of admissions, but where their strengths and weaknesses are. I find an application so compelling if they didn't do so well for a semester in college, or if there is an unexplained gap in time, or there's just something that we all know is a little bit of a red flag, or at least a pink flag, and they address it head on. They talk about it in their application. We give them. Post-Bac has a very much like AMCAS has a personal statement that they write, but then we have an additional optional essay that's just totally blank space, where they can put whatever they want. And if they have something like that in their background and then just glide right over that opportunity to talk about it and don't share it with us, that's probably something that I would love people to hear, is probably not the right way to go. Showing that you have the maturity to be aware of it, and then talk about, obviously, hopefully you've moved on from whatever that thing was. But don't just sweep it under the rug or pretend it doesn't exist. That's something that we see a lot.
One thing, kind of back with the advisor hat on, that I heard from you, both of you, kind of last week when we were kind of going over what we want to discuss today, was not having current students not heeding your advice. And that's sometimes frustrating for you, right? Hey, what does that look like? What does that mean? Because who's not taking your advice, and why does that frustrate you? Elizabeth?
Well, I think, sometimes I'll have a student in my office saying, oh, well, so-and-so, my classmate did this or said this. And, or sometimes they're following advice from, a classmate they know from college who's already in medical school. Or sometimes it's from a mentor who's a physician. I think, what I would hope that they would remember is that whoever they're taking advice from, if it's a current student, they might not be as well informed. If it's somebody who's in med school or has, completed medical school, they've had a single point of view. They've had a single experience at one particular place.
Mm-hmm.
And, folks like Glenn and I have literally helped hundreds of students get to med school and go forward on this journey. And so, things also change, certainly over time. So, what somebody's experience applying and entering medical school was 20 years ago is bound to be quite different from what current applicants are going through today. So, we've invested a lot of, time and energy in really being informed about this process. And, our goal is to help them, our goals really align here. We want the best, we want the same things for them. And we're also giving them, I think, an unbiased view, and, really advice geared to help them move forward, and be as successful as possible.
Right. I mean, in fact, probably the main motto we have around the Bryn Mawr program is to trust the process, and I always tell them that and they laugh and they hear it from the class before and then they quote it back at me before I've even said it,
Okay. Trust the process.
But what I'm not saying there is blindly trust the process, and I think what they hear is, I'm asking to just jump off a cliff, and no one's asking to do that. So, I mean, I always encourage the current students to ask a lot of questions, don't, but come to the source, come to the people who have seen the classes pass through year after year after year. And if you're hearing advice from, like Elizabeth saying, like the friend or the family member or something, come test it out with me, engage in a conversation.
Absolutely.
Don't be blind about it, but also, there is an element of trust and kind of just faith that they have to have.
Yeah, I mean,
this is going to work out.
I think this is kind of a general public service announcement for anyone who's listening, whether they're looking at post-bacs or not, and if they have an advisor, to trust these people. I mean, like Elizabeth said, we've shared goals here. Like, I want to see you be successful. And so, and then like Glenn said, if you heard something else, then go test it out on them, because I want listeners to know that we communicate. Medical school admissions officers and pre-health advisors communicate all the time. We go to similar conferences together and get new information together and share information together. And so I think that's sometimes where, like Elizabeth said, the one person with their one experience can be helpful, but it may not be best for their current situation. And that's where talking with your advisor and really listening to their advice can be a game changer versus discrediting or not heeding what they're trying to guide you on.
I think something else that's valuable is that we've worked with students who've not been successful.
Right.
Especially people who work with enhancement students are used to working with students who have applied to medical school in the past. And we're in the position of trying to, kind of assess, what went wrong and, how to make a course correction and what can you do to address, whatever it was. And some advice that I think is important to share is if students can come at this med school application process as an unconditional applicant, I think that's incredibly helpful. That's a phrase that one of my physician colleagues uses, and I think it's very powerful. Sometimes students will come in and have a particular idea in mind that, I want to go to this school, I want to pursue this particular specialty, and that's the only thing that will make me happy. And we really encourage students to be more open. We really believe that you'll get a great medical education at any U.S. medical school, and, to approach this process with more flexibility, more open-mindedness, and just to embrace the fact that you can't control all of the parts of it. So all it takes is one admission offer, and we encourage our students to take that from wherever it comes, because that will move you forward. And the important thing should be becoming a physician. Yep. So there comes a point when you really have to decide, what are you willing to do to become a physician? and what preconceived ideas you may be willing to give up.
The unconditional applicant. I love it. That's a great phrase. I think this is a great way to kind of start to finalize things. Glenn, do you have any kind of parting thoughts about or advice for people that may be listening about going forward?
Sure. Well, it's never too late. I mean, would be one thing that I would want to make sure that I would communicate.
Yeah.
I think that's for people looking for the enhancement or the career changer, either
Mm-hmm.
one. There's sometimes a inertia that sometimes people feel when they're looking at these programs, like, I'm just too old. Medical schools are not gonna take me seriously. And I hope today we've kind of clarified that sometimes those individuals have a lot to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really isn't too late. And then I know this is kind of basic, but get going. I mean, what is it? The secret to getting ahead is getting started. Is that what, I think it's like Mark Twain or something that said that. I mean, especially if you're a career changer and you're sitting at your desk at your, consulting firm right now thinking, I don't want to be doing this. I want to be a physician. I hope people listening are going to at least do some research and start thinking about
get inspired,
how to make this work. And, maybe you'll decide it's too much. Maybe you'll decide the expense is too much. The risk is too much. The commitment is too much, but at least get started. I worry sometimes that at least the career changers aren't going to make that change. And then 20, 30 years from now, they're going to look back and go, what, why didn't I just spend a Saturday afternoon researching post-bac programs? I mean, was it really that hard to do? So that would be my 2 cents worth.
I will say I saw that AMCAS put out their infographic data on kind of recapping the entering class of 2019, the previous application cycle, and the oldest student to matriculate nationally was 53 years old.
Right.
Awesome.
So I think that that's really an outlier, but it does illustrate, like you're saying, Glenn, like you're never too old to start this. And clearly some medical school, accepted this person, and now they're in their first year of med school as a 53-year-old. So you're never too old to start. So, hey, this has been awesome. I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and I hope people that have been listening, especially our non-traditional students that are maybe in this position where they've been thinking about it, now have the inspiration to take that Saturday afternoon and start, pouring over the links and things that we'll provide. And can they reach out to you with any questions? Can we do that?
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So I'll make sure
just postbac at brynmawr.edu is our email address. And,
okay. I'll put links to both. We'll talk about the contact info you want me to use, and then I'll put those in the show notes. So if students want to reach out to you and ask more questions about your program or just more questions in general about post-bacs, we'll put those there. Hey, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time. It's really been very, very informative today.
Thanks so much.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, I'm going to see you guys around. Thanks so much. See ya.
Take care.
Bye-bye.